Welcome to Vibe Querying with MCP, the show where we don't just query data, we vibe with it. I'm Jared, the one asking, how does it work?
And I'm Marie, the one asking, what does it mean for the business? But before we jump into today's episode, we're going to explain a few of the technologies that we're using today.
Yeah, and so that all starts with Model Context Protocol, or MCP for short. This is a protocol that Anthropic released in late 2024, and it just provides a way for AI agents, LLMs, AI clients to communicate with external data sources. So now your LLM can communicate with things like Salesforce, Workday, and more.
And how we're using the Model Context Protocol today is with CData's Connect product. And so it essentially uses the remote MCP capabilities to connect any enterprise data source you want to ask questions of to your favorite LLM or AI client, which we'll be using Claude for today's episode.
Yeah, and that brings us to the concept of vibe querying. Vibe querying, much like vibe coding, is a way to use natural language to get information about your external data system. So now instead of having to know an API or know SQL, you can simply ask things like, which accounts are most at risk, or which of my team members have the highest performance in the past month.
And that's what we do in each episode of Vibe Querying. So we'll bring on a special guest, we'll talk about a specific function of the business or a specific problem, and see what answers we can uncover by using MCP servers and Claude.
Yeah. So today's episode is Vibing with Revenue Operations. It's all about understanding the complete customer journey across all touchpoints to identify what drives successful customer acquisitions and renewals. We're going to be asking for answers from our Salesforce data today.
And our guest this episode is Elliot York, Director of FP&A at CData. Welcome to the show, Elliot. Are you ready to vibe with us? Our guest this episode is Elliot York, Director of FP&A at CData. Welcome to the show, Elliot. Are you ready to vibe with us?
Yep.
Great. We are glad to have you. So let's see what we have planned today to ask Claude.
Yeah. So, apparently I have not shared since I updated Chrome. But so start with our bestie Claude, and then I have this doozy of a prompt that Elliot has put together. So I think I'm going to click go. And then while this runs, Elliot, I think it'd be great to hear about how you've been using MCP for your work, and then what led to this doozy of a prompt, kind of the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, of course. So I've been using MCP a ton recently to understand what I would say is customer journey. And the two main questions I'm really trying to understand through looking at this full customer journey is, why do we land new business and why do we lose renewals, right? And the first question, new business, that's the example we're going to go through. And there's a ton you can kind of sub questions within new business that you can ask, and we can go through some of that. First, I think maybe we could talk a little bit about renewals, because I think that's an easy one to talk through and interesting, and gets into a lot of the concepts on why I think MCP is really useful, or why it has been for me. So with renewals, and we're querying Salesforce, by the way. So that's the tool that we're looking at to get all this information. And so with renewals, when we lose a renewal, typically what we historically rely on, and most teams do, in understanding why a customer may or may not have renewed with us, is the closed loss reason. So that is a field in Salesforce that our renewals team, when they're working a renewal, they mark when somebody doesn't renew. And you can imagine, there's a lot of thought that goes into, one, identifying within Salesforce or any CRM what fields you should even put in the system. And then from that, within each field, what are the right, in this case, reasons to put. And there's a lot of different opinions and thoughts as to how you can do that. And at the end of the day, none of it's perfect. It's also, like with a closed loss reason, can be very subjective as to what that particular user might actually know about the deal. For example, what we find, and what you find in a lot of businesses, is when folks don't renew, they typically don't give you a lot of information on why they don't renew. So you end up with a lot of blanks, or no reason, or unhelpful reasons, right? But within the customer journey, there's tons of information that you can find on, what a customer used the software for, why maybe they weren't happy if that was the case, they didn't renew, or why their use case went away. We're a very technical product, so often you find a lot of support tickets. You can look at interactions with pre-sales if they went through a POC process, lots of interactions with sales during initial discovery, throughout the renewals, et cetera. So lots of phone calls, et cetera. So there's a lot of information that we have at our disposal. However, it's all over the place, right? And a lot of it's very qualitative. So trying to get all of that information and decipher what's actually useful to understand, in the case of a renewal, why they didn't renew. The information's there, but it's really hard to gather. And I've done this personally where I go into Salesforce and look through all this data, and I can tell you can get lost in a complex deal for a day, right? And still sometimes have an incomplete picture. So what I have found really useful is utilizing MCP. Is I can get a very well documented summary of all of that desperate information, a lot of it very qualitative in nature, but I can get it all in one place in a very digestible format, and it doesn't take long at all. And from there, I can just continue to ask additional questions to dive deeper on, whatever it is I find interesting about that particular deal.
That's really cool. And I think one of the points that we try to make in the show is that a lot of that is possible because of the technology that CData has built that underlies our MCP servers. So we don't have to build an MCP server that is specific to Salesforce, that has access to every endpoint, has access to every object or collection. But because we've already got the connectivity technology that makes Salesforce look like a database, LLMs are very good at working with databases. And so that means that when you ask a natural language question, it's able to parse that data model, figure out which parts of Salesforce it needs to look at without knowing that it is using the API. So the LLM doesn't have to know the Salesforce API. It doesn't have to handle authentication. It's already connected. CData has already built that. And so this MCP layer on top just makes it so that you, as a natural language user, can get access to all of that data without having to know the technical know-how of either the API or even the SQL that we translate everything into. So, and I think that all of that exploration has informed this doozy of a prompt that you have put together here. So you wanna walk us through this and
yeah,
talk us through how you got here?
Yeah, of course. So I've talked a lot about renewals, and I wanted to do that just because I think it's a simple example to walk through. But I think the new business side has a lot more questions that you can answer on the new business side on why you want a particular deal. So that's why I chose a new business deal. So I started off using MCP, just asking very basic questions about customer journey. And as I kept prompting and kept utilizing it over, the days and weeks, I'm still very early on using this technology, but this was a hint that I got from you, Jared, not too long ago, is when you get a output that you like, in this case, the output that I got at whatever point of the journey, I thought it included most of what I was looking for. So I just asked MCP, hey, what prompt can I ask to get this output again? And I ended up with this. So it's not as though I created this from scratch. Like, it was actually very intuitive to get to the point where, I created this. And from here, I'll continue to iterate, because I ask a lot of additional prompts, but a lot of times it depends on the situation, right? On what kind of prompts I ask. But yeah. That's how I got there. It's pretty easy.
Yeah. So you had this experience where you were trying to solve a problem and you asked a bunch of questions throughout a whole session. And then, like you said, and I think Jacqueline was the first one to coin it with us, as this purposeful prompting, right? So you've got this exploratory kind of, I don't know what I want, but I know I want something, and you keep asking questions. And like you said, then at the end, you just ask Claude, hey, do this prompt for me so that I can do this again a lot quicker. So I think, so we've got stuff in here. I like how Claude told itself to use emojis to make it visually engaging and scannable. So that's fun. And it actually, this was pretty quick. So we've been riffing for a little while, but anybody that was paying attention watched that artifact popped up just a few seconds after I entered the prompt, which is pretty cool. So we're looking at customer XYZ, and Elliot, you know who that means, but it's anonymized for the safety and security of our customers and our business. And so this is where it is putting together information. It's building this query that it's going to submit. It's getting the data that it needs. So refining that query, looking at the Salesforce data model, and then we've got this executive summary. But I'll pull up the artifact at the same time.
And I will comment on the query as well, because when I first started utilizing MCP, I found it very helpful that it uses SQL personally, because being a finance person, typically we're not always the most educated around these technologies, but SQL is very easy to follow. So I use Salesforce every day and I build reports. So building reports, you have to understand, some basics about how the tables are organized. So I can look at the SQL query and see what it's querying to gather the information. So I find that very useful.
Cool.
So yeah, so I'm just trying to understand, basically what I'm doing with all of these deals is just trying to understand what happened in the deal from start discovery, before discovery to close one, right? And so this basic prompt gives me a lot of that information, and gives me, again, the helpful thing is it's looking through a lot more than just, let's say, opportunity level data, right? It's looking at, in some cases, phone calls. It's looking at emails back and forth between, if support's involved, pre-sales. It's looking at the discovery phase, phone calls, emails with our BDR team if they're involved, and then of course interactions with sales and anybody else. So you can imagine all the interactions that happen between different teams. It's summarizing all of that in one place. So that's what I love about it, because you get a lot of insights that are they're there, but they're really hard to uncover sometimes. So there's some basics about the deal up front, nothing too surprising there. If we scroll down a little bit here, it talks about the challenges, et cetera. And it really starts with kind of the discovery phase, and the deal. So the first kind of interesting point that I found, actually, if you scroll up a little bit, I will comment on one thing. So keep going to the top. The lead source, here indicates that it's from business development, so from a BDR, so the lead source is part of the way we have our marketing attribution set up. And Marie, you probably know more about this than I do, but I think the lead source is what it's tracking here is when an opportunity gets created, it's trying to generate essentially what that first touch came from, right? Trying to identify essentially a first touch point in which we can say that's probably what led to this opportunity being created. And although the lead source gets created correctly, there's oftentimes a lot of other things happening behind the scenes that are interesting when you uncover. So if we scroll back down into the deal, back where we were, the first kind of thing that I uncovered was, it's a little difficult here because again, we've anonymized a lot of information, but it points out a particular contact that we had interactions with that was a partner of ours, a implementation partner. And it might even be slightly below that it calls this out. But very early on, I determined that there was an implementation partner identified. And so one of the first kind of subsequent prompts that I did, because I was very interested by this, I always am when there's a partner involved, is I just asked, and it may not work here because we don't have the name shown, but I just essentially asked Claude, hey, give me more information about this particular contact. And so what I found it was an implementation partner that we have had interactions with before. And digging into the deal further, it appeared that this implementation partner was critical in this particular opportunity, even coming into CData in the first place, right? And that's a really interesting thing to uncover on what led to the opportunity. So that was kind of, I think, the first interesting finding that I had on this particular deal.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, tracking that down by logging into Salesforce and exploring through the Salesforce UI would have taken much longer. And then even after you identify it, then finding information about potentially other deals where this contact has been involved, or anything, again, is going to be that experience where you have to log in, you have to search, relying on Salesforce's search capabilities. And here you just ask a natural language question: what other deals has contact A been involved in? Which is cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is like Jared said, quite a prompt, but I mean, I think this is amazing, kind of what you get out of it. And I feel like we're not even halfway through the results here.
Yeah.
It breaks out kind of by deal stage, it looks like, the way that you've written it, Elliot.
Yeah, typically it kind of gives it to you in chronological order, right? Which naturally kind of follows the deal stages.
Got it.
So
typically. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment on kind of how it followed through the deal stages, and typically gives you that first discovery, all the way to op creation and so on. So
that's great. And my question was on something like lead source. I'm curious, in your experience, how often Claude surfaces what is categorized in the data as lead source versus surfaces you a different answer that it's gleaning from the information.
Yeah, so honestly, I can't remember if I ask within the prompt lead source, but I must, because it actually gives me the lead source that's on the opportunity every single time, which is a key data point that we do store within Salesforce, right? And it is useful in and of itself. Yeah, there you go. However, there's just often so much additional information that you can gather outside of that lead source, where, again, like, lead source gets created a very particular way, and it's not right or wrong, but it's not always the most useful thing either.
Yeah.
So.
And I think my question beneath that question was, we always ask our guests on how they feel about the accuracy of what they get back from Claude in terms of hallucinations versus the reality of the actual data in the system. And I feel like that was kind of one of the questions, but I'm actually not sure which one you would prefer. Like, do you really want the lead source from Salesforce and that's what you want Claude to surface? Or do you actually want to understand where Claude's flagging something different than what's the structured data in the system?
I mean, for this particular exercise, I'm just trying to understand all of the different interactions with our customers. So I'm a little less reliant on like individual data points and like quantitative analysis here. So from my use of MCP, like, it's really good at doing that, right? Like, I don't see a lot of hallucinations when it comes to just gathering, different communications back and forth and just giving me that information.
That's great.
So,
all right, what else do we have? What do we have in this very first prompt that Elliot gave us?
Yeah, so aside from partner, and I did see where partner was mentioned again, down there, partner engagement. That's probably was kind of the first place where I saw that. The other interesting thing about this deal is where you see solution refinement. It says evolution from basic JDBC to comprehensive sync solution. So reading through this is an interesting use case for us, for our business. And Marie, you're very familiar with this, is we oftentimes have a lot of deals that come in as drivers and end up going to a different solution. So somebody comes to us with a particular problem, right? And we have a lot of different ways to solve that problem. And so we're always trying to understand how those come in and then what product they ultimately purchase. And that's really hard to gather that information from just like looking within opportunity data in the system. And this just, again, showcases something very interesting, I think, that otherwise is really difficult to get.
Yeah.
So that was another really interesting point here in this deal.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think, the other part of it, and this is often a prompt I ask beyond this, is tell me a little bit more about interactions before the opportunity was created. And that's probably where this prompt actually needs to be refined a bit. And what I found is this was an existing customer of ours for a couple years, and it's not within the prompt, of course. That's like a second prompt on top of this. And they were a customer of ours for several years. There was 3 different contacts within this customer, all within different departments, different use cases, and different products. So I kind of was able to gather this full picture of the customer within, probably 15, 30 minutes of just prompting and reading through all of this. I mean, it gives you the information really quickly. It's more of just taking time reading and understanding it. So, yeah, I think the next steps for me in this technology is it does a really great job of summarizing the customer journey for a customer. And you could see I'm still doing this one customer at a time. The next part of the journey for me is going to be trying to understand how I can do this at scale, right? Like how do I gather this information and summarize it in a meaningful way for, 5,000 customers, right? All at once. So that to me is like the next big leg in this journey, is trying to understand how to do that. Because right now, one way to do it, right, is you run it for 20 individual customers, put it in a Word doc with your summary with each one, put it back into Claude, and you can summarize it. And it does really good at that. But there's got to be a better way. So,
yeah,
that makes sense. And I assume you've tried doing it directly, Elliot. It's just too much information for.
It's a lot of information. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
you could probably do a couple deals at a time, but the whole point would be to, if you were able to do this at scale with, cohort of customers, and you just ask Claude, hey, this cohort of customers, I want this kind of information summarized, and it be able to look at all of this qualitative data across all of these different sources could be really useful. And I think we'll get there, but we're early on in utilizing this. So
yeah, it sounds to me like you need a network of deal analysis agents that are all running in parallel across hundreds of deals, and then feeding that back into a summary agent or something. So it also sounds like I just made work for my team. So, which could be a fun experiment. I think we're close to wrapping, but the one thing that I wanted to call out, because you said, repeating this process for multiple customers, but one of the things that I really like about what Claude does is that like it gives you like analysis on like actions that you can take. And so in identifying that this was a JDBC to sync deal, right? Is this a pattern that we can follow? Can we go into other healthcare systems that are using our JDBC drivers and give them a better experience by shifting them from a JDBC driver to CData sync to perform the same task? Like is this a common pattern amongst our customers? Is this a problem that we can solve, across our customers while, landing and expanding our own business, which is cool.
Yeah.
So information for you about our customers, and then information for our sellers about the work that they can be doing, to further the business, which is cool.
Yeah, and one way we have utilized this throughout the business already is we've rolled this into our weekly sales process. So every week we run a go-to-market meeting, and we send out the results of our new business to a go-to-market team and a few other folks. And we've started incorporating these customer journeys. Typically we'll take a new logo and expansion deal that happened that week and share the story. So again, you find little tidbits and interesting things, and oftentimes follow-up questions that hopefully result in good outcomes for the business. So that's the point of all of this, but it's a good start, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Elliot, we want to give you a big thanks for joining us today on this episode of Vibe Querying.
Of course. Thanks.
Yep. And we do want to say thanks to all of our watchers and listeners for joining and taking time out of your day. If you want to get the same experience that Elliot has gotten, you can hit up either the free beta MCP servers that you can download and install on your machine, or check out the MCP capabilities for our Connect Cloud product. cdata.com/solutions/MCP will get you both of those options.
Or if you want more information like Elliot shared today, you can come hang with us in our Vibe querying subreddit or in the CData community, where we talk about queries, insights, and all the good things that you can do with data.
Yep. So until next time, stay curious and keep vibing.